What if I told you that money didn't create greed? Greed existed long before money did. What if the very first economic system wasn't fair, peaceful, or cooperative, but fragile, tense, and often violent? Long before coins, banks, or even written language, humans were already fighting over value, resources, and power. So the real question I ask into when money corrupted us, but whether it ever had the chance not to. To understand that, we have to go back to a world with no currency at all. Setting the stage, life before money, tens of thousands of years ago. Early human societies lived without coins, bills, or numbers assigned to value. There were no prices, no savings accounts, no wages. At first glance, it sounds almost peaceful, people trading freely, sharing what they had, surviving together. But that image hides a deeper truth. Early economies were built not on money, but on survival. And survival is never neutral. In small hunter-gatherer groups, humans depended entirely on nature. Food could be plentiful one season and vanish the next. A successful hunt might feed everyone today, but tomorrow was never guaranteed. In this environment, trade wasn't optional, it was necessary. People exchanged meat, tools, shelter materials, knowledge, and labor. But these exchanges weren't instant or equal. They were delayed, remembered, and judged. This is where the first economic system truly began, not barter, but trust. Origins: trust as the first currency. Early, human trade didn't look like modern barter where one item is swapped immediately for another. Instead, it operated on obligation and memory. If one person shared food today, it created an unspoken debt. The expectation wasn't immediate repayment, but future loyalty. Trust became the most valuable resource of all. Anthropologists call this a gift economy, but gifts weren't free. They came with social pressure. Refusing to share could lead to isolation. Failing to repay generosity could destroy reputation. In small communities, reputation was everything. Your access to food, protection, and even mates depended on it. At first, this system worked. When resources were stable and groups were small, trust-based exchange reinforced cooperation. Helping others increased your chances of survival later. But this balance depended on one fragile assumption: that scarcity would be temporary. It wasn't. Rise, when scarcity entered the system, as human populations grew and environments changed, scarcity became more frequent and more severe. Droughts lasted longer. Game migrated or disappeared. Natural disasters wiped out stored resources. Suddenly, not everyone could afford to be generous. When resources shrank, trust began to crack. Those who controlled essential goods, food, water access, tools, or land gained power. Trade shifted from mutual aid to leverage. A spear maker could demand more food. A hunter with consistent success gained influence. What once looked like cooperation slowly turned into hierarchy. This is the moment many people imagine money appearing to fix inequality. But inequality came first. Scarcity forced people to choose. Share and risk starvation, or hoard and survive. Over time, hoarding often won. Breaking point: conflict without currency, without money. Early societies still experienced economic violence. Archaeological evidence shows signs of organized conflict far earlier than coinage. Mass graves, fortified settlements, and weapon injuries suggest that competition over resources escalated into warfare. Why? Because trust-based systems collapse under prolonged scarcity. When survival depends on access to limited resources, social memory turns into resentment. Debts become disputes. Generosity becomes exploitation. Groups fracture. Outsiders are no longer trade partners. They're threats. At this stage, trade stopped being about cooperation and became about control. Stronger groups took from weaker ones. Early leaders emerged not because they were fair, but because they could enforce order or dominate rivals. In other words, the roots of economic power were planted long before money existed. The rise of authority and ownership. As trust-based systems failed, societies adapted, but not in equal ways. Some groups formalized ownership. Land, tools, and resources were no longer communal. They belonged to families, clans, or leaders. Others developed tribute systems, where weaker members were required to give resources in exchange for protection. This marked a critical shift. Value became centralized. Once value could be controlled, it could be measured. Once it could be measured, it could be standardized. And once it was standardized, money became inevitable, not as a solution to greed, but as a tool to manage inequality that already existed. By the time coins appeared thousands of years later, societies were already accustomed to hierarchy, debt, and economic obligation. Money didn't invent these problems. It organized them. Failed fixes: why early systems couldn't last. Early humans tried many ways to preserve fairness without currency. Some enforced strict sharing rules. Others punished hoarding or banished those who broke social norms. But these fixes only worked in small, stable groups. As societies grew larger, trust couldn't scale. You can trust 30 people. You can't trust 30,000 without systems, enforcement, or symbols of value. This limitation forced humans to abandon pure trust-based economies. The moment trade extended beyond close relationships, trust had to be replaced with something else. That something else became money. Modern parallels: the pattern repeats. Here's the disturbing part: the same pattern still exists today. Modern economies claim to be rational and data-driven, but they're still ruled by scarcity, real or manufactured. When resources feel limited, trust erodes. People hoard wealth, inequality widens, conflict follows. During economic crises, cooperation drops. During shortages, prices spike. During uncertainty, power concentrates. Even today, money functions less as a neutral tool and more as a modern version of early leverage, deciding who eats, who rests, who survives, and who struggles. We've replaced social memory with credit scores, trust with contracts, and reputation with numbers. But the emotional logic hasn't changed. Scarcity still breaks systems. First, early human economies were never purely peaceful. Even without money, trade was shaped by survival pressure and unequal access to resources. Second, trust works only when scarcity is temporary. When scarcity becomes permanent, power replaces cooperation. Third, money didn't corrupt humanity. It formalized conflicts that already existed, making them scalable and persistent. Warning: if our earliest systems failed because trust couldn't survive scarcity, the question isn't to whether money is evil, but whether any system can remain fair when resources feel limited. And if modern scarcity is often artificial, what does that say about the world we've built? Call to action? If this changed how you think about money, history, or human nature, consider subscribing for deeper explorations into the hidden forces shaping our world. Share this video with someone who believes greed started with money and ask them if the story really begins there.